Good afternoon to each and every one of you. We're so thankful to you for joining us on this Tuesday afternoon. It is election day, which means I'm sure that you have zero worries, zero cares on your mind at all today. We certainly are thankful to live in the land of freedoms that we have, where we get to participate in our government, but we are abundantly more blessed and more appreciative, I hope, to our hearts, to be a part of the great kingdom of heaven. And we're going to hope to build upon your faith in God today as we finish out our looking at Deuteronomy. We have been working through this text, taking it section by section, yet we're ready to move on. We want to get to Joshua to get back into the narrative portion of this Old Testament section of our Bibles. And in order to do that, we're going to do the summary of all summaries. There is so much that could be said from the rest of Deuteronomy, from chapter 7 through the rest of the book, and we could spend a lot of time dissecting the text and looking at the intricacies and the nuances of the text. But we just want to do a summation at this point to set the scene for what's going to take place in the rest of the biblical narrative as we're walking through history here in this particular Bible study. Thank you for joining us today. I do hope that this study is a blessing to you, and I hope that it will help you in your faith. It'll encourage you, and I hope that it'll take your mind off of everything else that's going on in this world right now, and to think about God and all the great and wonderful promises that he has extended to his people of old, and how the very principles of those promises, how they remain for us today. I hope this might bring you some peace and comfort on, again, what could be at least a little bit of a stressful day here in our country. Joining me, as always, is my good friend, Alan Seenestrang. Alan, hope you're doing well today. Thanks for joining us on this Tuesday.
Yeah, doing good. Looking forward to, I think tomorrow is going to be our first day back on Wednesday nights.
That's right.
For our congregation. So I'm excited to get back to worshiping together, at least Bible class on Wednesday.
Yeah, absolutely. In the adult class, I know we're going to be working through the minor prophets, which was something we had on our calendar for this year, having different men teach different ones of the minor prophets over a week or so time frame. But of course, this is 2020, and whatever plans you have, you might as well throw them out the window because they're not happening this year. Chris Benson is going to be leading us in that study. And actually, what we're looking at today, Alan, has a lot to do with what we're going to see in that minor prophet study, because so much of what is said in the prophets, whether it be what we know as the major prophets, the longer books, or the shorter minor prophets books, so much of it can be tied back into what we see here in Deuteronomy, especially pertaining to the blessings and the cursings. As just to bring us back up to pace and get us up to speed as to where we have been in this study, we have been looking through Deuteronomy, and of course, this is the time of preparation where Moses is preparing the people for entry into the promised land. We read back a few studies ago where they had marched right up into the doorstep of the promised land. God had shown them that this was a land that they can go in and possess by his power. Unfortunately, 10 out of the 12 spies doubted. They doubted in their ability to take the land. Only Joshua and Caleb said that we can do it. And yet, because of the unfaithfulness of the majority, they were not able to enter into the land. So now they've been wandering in the wilderness for 40 years, waiting for that generation to die off. Now they're preparing to enter in. We've looked up to this point where there's been a retelling of the history of Israel in the first few chapters of Deuteronomy. Then there are strong teachings of re-emphasizing the law, and specifically the Ten Commandments, as they were given again in chapter 5. Chapter 6, we talked about in our last study, the Shema of Israel, where they are to listen, to remember that the Lord their God is one God, and they are to love him with all their heart, minds, souls, and strength, which is something that is emphasized by Jesus in the New Testament when he is asked, what are the two greatest commandments? You should love the Lord your God, and then love your neighbor as yourself. That first portion, though, Alan, and specifically that first command, the Ten Commandments, that's something that's emphasized beginning in chapter 6. And what we're going to do, again, as I said, we're just going to do a summary. We're going to take different sections and highlight a few different things in these sections. That way we can lay a foundation for what's going to happen as Israel's history continues on. There is still so much of the story left to be told in this study. We're going to get into that in our future studies in the weeks to come. But we can almost always draw back what is said here in the rest of Deuteronomy to what is going to take place. And in fact, some of the things we're going to talk about today are foreshadowings or foretellings of what is going to take place. Unfortunately, the unfaithfulness of the people is going to be spoken of here in a few of these sections. That's what we're going to talk about today in this study. Hope that you have a Bible and you'll join us in Deuteronomy. If not, no worries. We have the text here on the screen, and you can join us right here. Alan, as I mentioned, chapters 6 through 11 are really a retelling of that first command that is re-emphasized in chapter 5 and verse number 6, that I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the place of slavery. Do not have other gods besides me. Do not have other gods besides me. The emphasis here is I am your God. I am your God alone. I have brought you out of this place. And as we go through beginning in chapter 6 again, as it's really unpacking this first command, of course, we talk about the greatest command. Chapter 7 starts talking about the need to destroy idolatrous nations. For this reason, he gives this warning in verse number 2 of Deuteronomy chapter 7, when the Lord your God delivers them, all the ites, as are mentioned in verse number 1. You must completely destroy them, make no treaty with them, and show no mercy. You must not intermarry with them. You must not give your daughters to their sons or take their daughters for your sons, because they will turn your sons away from me to worship other gods. And then the Lord's anger will burn against you, and he will swiftly destroy you. Instead, this is what you are to do: tear down their altars, smash their sacred pillars, cut down their Asherah poles, and burn their carved images. For you are a holy people belonging to the Lord your God. The Lord your God has chosen you to be his own possession out of all the peoples that are on the earth. And then verse number 7 should stand out to us because it speaks of God's sovereignty in all of this. Because the Lord has set his heart on you and chose you, not because you were more numerous than all peoples, for you were the fewest of all peoples, but because the Lord loved you and kept the oath he swore to your fathers. He brought you out with a strong hand and redeemed you from the place of slavery, from the power of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Know the Lord your God is God, the faithful God who keeps his gracious covenant, loyalty for 1,000 generations with those who love him and keep his commandments. But notice this, verse number 10, but he directly pays back and destroys those who hate him. He will not hesitate to pay back directly the one who hates him. So keep the command, the statutes and ordinances that I'm giving you to follow today. And then there's our word in the next verse, Alan. If you listen to and are careful to keep these ordinances, the Lord your God will keep your covenant loyalty with you as he swore to your fathers. Before I turn it over to you, Alan, I just wanted to highlight this. Now, I went through and I searched for the number of times carefully is mentioned in this section. 7 through 11, there are 8 carefullys. 12 through 16, there are 9 carefullys. I think that has to speak to us. That must be something that we take notice of whenever a single word is repeated that many times. That shows in my mind the importance of recognizing the necessity that these are not just suggestions. These are not just things that they ought to, kind of take them to heart and, do them if they see fit. No, this is something they must do. And it is contingent upon their health as a nation and success as a nation is contingent upon their faithfulness to God. And here, again, tying back and unpacking that first command, this is, at least to me, the clearest indication of just how strongly God takes that first command of making sure that he is God for them alone and that there are no other gods before them.
One thing I notice here, verse 7 of chapter 7, the Lord set his heart on you and chose you, not because they were the most numerous or the strongest, but because they were the fewest.
Mm-hmm.
So he specifically chose this small nation out of all the nations he could have chosen because he loved their ancestors and because they were the fewest. So you would think, that's a reminder, you guys are weak without me. So you should follow my commands. You should love me. You're going up against multiple nations, 7 nations, it says in verse 1,
Mm-hmm.
more numerous and powerful than you. And the Lord's going to help them defeat them and completely destroy them. So they just mean, it's simple. You guys can't do this without me. Love me, obey me, follow my lead, follow my commands, and you will have success. If not, then obviously the numbers are stacked against you without God on their side.
Which is why I think there is this continual stressing in these chapters, again, 7 through 11, unpacking that first command, the need for their faithfulness. If they don't do it, they're just going to be destroyed. That's all there is to it. In chapter 8, there are these commands again to remember the Lord. Very first verse of chapter 8, carefully follow every command I'm giving you today, so that you may live and increase and may enter and take possession of the land the Lord swore to your fathers. Verse number 11, be careful. Verse number 11, be careful that you don't forget the Lord your God by failing to keep his commands, ordinances, and statutes that I am giving you today. When you eat and are full and build beautiful houses to live in, and your herds and flocks grow large, and your silver and gold multiply, and everything else you have increases, be careful that your heart doesn't become proud, and you forget the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the place of slavery. Here is that continual emphasis, Alan, on recognizing why they are where they are. It's not, as you just mentioned, I think that's really, really good for you to highlight that. It wasn't because they were special. These people were not a special people. They were not a great and numerous people. They were not a great and powerful people. No, they were only what they were, having become numerous, having become powerful, because of the God who supported them. Here, Moses reminds them, don't get the big head. That's really what it comes down to. Don't become prideful. Don't become arrogant. Don't think that you are where you are because of what you've done. You are nothing without God. Yeah, please, Alan, take it away from that text. I think that's a great highlight there.
Chapter 8, verse 3 talks about just how weak they were. They were hungry. They had no way to even feed themselves. And the Lord, verse 3 there, gave them manna to eat. And what was the point of that? To learn that man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God. Where have we heard this before? Well, I guess not before this chapter, but later on, we're going to see this in Matthew chapter 4, when Satan tempts Jesus, and Jesus 40 days without bread. He's hungry. Satan offers, tells him, turn that stone into bread. And Jesus remembers this. So he has learned that lesson. These people, will they learn that same lesson? We'll see later on, probably not. Verse 4, their clothing did not wear out. Their feet did not swell for 40 years. That's later on. I think it talks about the sandals on their shoes never wore out. For 40 years, they're walking, they're wandering, and they've had everything that they've needed. Miraculously so. I mean, bread coming from the sky, and their clothes not wearing down. And what is the point of all this? Verse 5, the Lord is disciplining them.
Yeah.
If we're wondering why, we know why they're wandering for 40 years. It had to do with their rebellion at Kadesh Barnea. And because the spies spied out the land for 40 days, they would wander for 40 years. So that's part of the reason. But another part is they are children, and they need to be trained. They need to be disciplined, just like a son does. We do not send our children to college or out into the world when they're my son's age, Lincoln. He's 4 months old. They need growth. They need training. They need discipline, and that takes several years, much more than just 4 months or 4 years. We typically keep our kids in our home at least till 18. So, and even that's probably too young. So, this is what God is doing. He's not going to throw them into the fire until they're ready. And even when they should have been ready, they still rebelled against him. But that's what the Lord has been doing for 40 years, not just wandering, but disciplining them and training them. So keep the command. So they will keep the commands of the Lord and walk in his ways and fear him. Verse 6, because the Lord is bringing them into a good land. So this is what they've been preparing for 40 years. Will they be up to the task in the next book in Joshua?
And Moses anticipates that they are going to have success, that you are going to be able to enter into this land, that you are going to be able to overtake the people and take possession of this land, which I believe, as you're giving evidence to of what God has done up until this point, Moses is saying, this is what you've experienced. You've experienced God disciplining you and God strengthening you and God supplying for you. So do not think that you are strong and of yourselves. Again, verse 14, be careful that your heart doesn't become proud and you forget the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the place of slavery. Chapter 9, again, anticipates them being able to go into the land and being able to have victory and successes against the people. Think about verse number 2. The people are strong and tall, the descendants of the Anakim. You know about them and you have heard it said about them, who can stand up against the sons of Anak? But understand that today the Lord your God will cross over ahead of you as a consuming fire. He will devastate and subdue them before you. You will drive them out and destroy them swiftly, as the Lord has told you. And when the Lord your God drives them out before you, do not say to yourself, the Lord has brought me in to take possession of this land because of my righteousness. Instead, the Lord will drive out these nations before you because of their wickedness. Again, here's this idea that they might have, well, if God is giving us these great victories, if he is allowing us to have success against these mighty people and to take possession of this land, it must be because we're special and because we are great. Well, no, what has he just said? He has just said that you are not strong, going back to chapter 7, that you are not the most numerous, you are the fewest, but it's because of my love I have for you, and because the oaths and the promises I've given to your fathers. That's why I'm strengthening you. Look at everything that I've done for you. Again, middle to end of chapter 8. Don't become proud. Don't forget what the Lord has done for you. Here, chapter 9. Don't think that you're here because you're right, because of your extreme righteousness. In fact, Alan, even though this generation that originally failed to enter into the land, even though they are gone at this point, we can't forget that they've still had struggles. The current generation still had struggles. They failed in various ways up until this point in moving towards the promised land. The Lord says it's not because of your righteousness, it's not because you're great. Really, this is a judgment of the wickedness of the people of Canaan land. That's why you're going to be able to go in and take possession of it. Verse number 5, you are not going to take possession of the land because of your righteousness or your integrity. Instead, the Lord your God will drive out these nations before you because of their wickedness, in order to fulfill the promises he swore to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Understand that the Lord your God is not giving you this good land to possess because of your righteousness, for you are a stiff-necked people. You are stiff-necked people. And then what does Moses do after this, Alan? Well, he goes back and he reiterates the examples of their stiff-neckedness, if that's a word, not stiff-nakedness, but stiff-neckedness. What does he say? Begin verse 7, Alan. What does he go back and bring back to their mind what the ways that they've already failed?
This takes them back to Exodus chapter 32,
Mm-hmm.
the incident with the golden calf,
Yep.
and then how Moses had to broke the 2 stones, and then had to go back and back onto the mountain. And let's see, verse 16, you had made a calf image for yourself. You quickly turned from the Lord. Just kind
But
of
Alan, they
reiterates.
said they're righteous.
I love that verse back up here. Just, it wasn't anything to do with their righteousness. It was more about, we don't think of it. We think of Israel as being the focal point, and those other people are wicked. We just got to get them out of the way. This makes it seem like it's the wickedness of these people that is so
Right.
wicked that
Right. Yeah.
God had to do something about it, and he's killing. Killing 2 birds with 1 stone, if you will. Fulfilling his promise to Abraham and the fathers there, and bringing that people back out. But the main reason was just to get someone to take out these Canaanites, these wicked Canaanites.
And God has the right and the ability to do so, because these are still his people in a sense. They are still his creation. My mind keeps going back to Exodus 19, Alan, and as Moses is preparing them to enter into this covenant with the Lord and what that's going to mean for them. In Exodus 19 and verse 5, now if you will carefully, there's our word again, carefully listen to me and keep my covenant, you will be my possession out of all the peoples. Notice this, although the whole earth is mine. The whole earth is mine. What does that mean? Well, everything lies under the power and the authority of God. The whole earth is his, and yet you, verse 6, will be my kingdom of priests and my holy nation. These are the words that you are to say to Israel. You think about it from the perspective of what the priests are going to do within Israel, and how the priests were going to meditate for Israel towards God. In a sense, this judgment, this conquest, is the people of Israel serving as a mediator. We normally think of the priests as being reconcilers between the people and God, but here they are executing God's divine judgment in going in and conquering these people. They have rebelled against God, against Yahweh, by going after other gods and deities, and for that unfaithfulness to him, here's their judgment. They're going to be cast out of their land. They're going to be destroyed by the people of Israel. And yet again, the emphasis here God is trying to get them to understand is it's not because you've been righteous. In fact, you've not been righteous. You've not been righteous. Let's not forget about the golden calf. Let's not forget about everything that you have done up until this point that showed your unfaithfulness. And yet God says, I'm going to show you my faithfulness. I'm going to show you my faithfulness by making sure that I fulfill the oath that was given to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Let's see here. Verse 26, Alan, back in Deuteronomy chapter 9. This is Moses again, Moses interceding for the people. Verse 25 of Deuteronomy 9, I fell down in the presence of the Lord 40 days and 40 nights because the Lord had threatened to destroy you. I pray to the Lord, Lord God, do not annihilate your people, your inheritance, whom you redeemed through your greatness and brought out of Egypt with a strong hand. Remember who? Remember your servants, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Disregard this people's stubbornness and their wickedness and sin. Otherwise, those who are in the land whom you brought us out from will say, because the Lord wasn't able to bring them into the land he has promised them, and because they hated them, he brought them out to kill them in the wilderness. But they are a people, your inheritance, whom you brought out by your great power and outstretched arm. Based upon this reminder, what Moses seeks to do now is to renew this covenant. To renew this covenant with them, to give a strong reminder of this great covenant that was given to them, to speak about what God requires of them from their hearts, that they keep, chapter 10 of verse 13, that they keep the Lord's commands and statutes I'm giving you today for your own good. The heavens, indeed, the highest heavens belong to the Lord your God, as does the earth and everything in it. Yet the Lord had his heart set on your fathers and loved them, and he chose their descendants after them, and he chose you out of all the people as it is today. Therefore, circumcise your hearts and don't be stiff-necked any longer. For the Lord your God is the God of gods, the Lord of lords, the great, mighty, and awe-inspiring God, showing no partiality and taking no bribe. He executes justice for the fatherless and the widow, and loves the resident alien, giving him food and clothing. You are also to love the resident alien, since you were resident aliens in the land of Egypt. You are to fear the Lord your God and worship him, remain faithful to him, and take the oaths in his name. He is your praise, and he is your God, who has done for you these great and awe-inspiring works your eyes have seen. Your fathers went down to Egypt, 70 people in all, and now look, the Lord your God has made you numerous, like the stars of the sea. And based upon this reminder and this admonition towards them, he says, listen, it's really simple. If you want this to go well for you, you need to listen and obey. You need to listen and obey. You need to remember and obey. It makes me think, Alan, of the song we sing, trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus than to trust and obey. For these people, there is no better way for them to have success in this new endeavor in the land of Canaan than to simply remember what God had done for them, to trust in him based upon his power, and to obey faithfully what he has done. If they do that, then things are going to be mighty fine for them. And yeah, I guess on the other side of the coin, there's that reminder. If you don't, then there's going to be incredible curses that you're going to have to endure. Alan, what do you have to add to this last section here of this first section about 6 through 11, reminding and unpacking that first great command?
I mean, verse 12 there of chapter 10. Is that where? Yep, chapter 10. I mean, this, even though this is in the Old Testament, this is has not been changed in the new law or new covenant at all. What does the Lord ask of you except to fear him, to walk in his ways, to love him, to worship the Lord your God with all your heart and your soul? I mean, that's a perfect summary statement of everything that Jesus taught. To love him, walk in his ways, and worship him. And of course, you can branch that off to talk about all sorts of different things that includes, loving your neighbor, all the proper aspects of worship and walking in his ways, the proper way to live, morality, all of that is part of this. But this is just a perfect summary statement, not just for old times, but for now as well, for us today.
And I mean, think about it, Alan, whenever the person comes to Jesus and asks, what is the greatest command? Which of all of them is the greatest command? This is very similar to exactly what Jesus says. You're to love the Lord your God and to love your neighbor as yourself. They needed to be careful. Again, there's our word, be careful, to make sure that this was their way of living. It was not, and it was even more than just their way of living. It was to be who they were at the heart of their character. They were to be God's people, not just in word or deed or action, but in heart. To do it with their heart, to circumcise their hearts. He just said here within this text. Let's see. I did just read that, right? I know I did. Oh, there's verse 16. Yeah, chapter 10 and verse 16. Therefore, circumcise your hearts and don't be stiff-necked any longer. For the Lord your God is the God of gods, the Lord of lords, the great, mighty, and awe-inspiring God, showing no partiality and taking no bribe. That's a strong verse right there. A very strong verse, speaking of the incredible nature of God and what they needed to do in response to his incredible nature. Alan, what do you have? Close this out here, then we'll move on from this section.
To think of, I know that's quoted somewhere. Circumcise your hearts. Is that? It's one of the prison epistles, I think.
Let me think here. Colossians 2 talks about that some in reference to baptism.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see here, Colossians 2 and verse number 11. You were also circumcised in him with a circumcision not done with hands, by putting off the body of flesh and the circumcision of Christ, when you were buried with him in baptism, which you were also raised with him through faith in the working of God, who raised him from the dead. And when you were dead in trespasses and in the uncircumcision of your flesh, he made you alive with him and forgave us all our trespasses. That's the first thing that comes to my mind. Maybe you have something else in mind as well.
Yeah, I'll take it. Lord, I forget. I don't know. I'm thinking of something like that, but I just that popped out to me. I was like, I've seen that before in a different text. I'm sure it's quoting from here.
Yeah, and that's something, Alan, I've noticed as well. We as Christians are most familiar, of course, with the New Testament. We are most familiar with the story of Jesus and with the writings of his apostles. It is awesome to get into the Old Testament and to see just how much of what they said was not exactly original with them, meaning that they drew on the inspiration of Scripture and what had been written prior to them in order to make that modern application or modern admonition from God. That's something that's just super cool. I don't know if you've noticed that as well, but hopefully our audience has noticed that too. As we're reading, and you get that thought in your mind, man, I've heard that before. And most of the time it would be something that is found in the New Testament. But moving on, Alan, the next section here chapter 12 through 16. Again, there's 9 carefully. 6 of those are in chapter 12, which is statutes and ordinances pertaining to worship, which that to me, again, shows us that whenever it comes to the worship of God, that's something that we really need to focus on, really need to think about. We don't go about it haphazardly. We don't go about it without wanting to take great consideration into what God has revealed he wants in that particular action that we want to be engaged in. Worship, of course, is of extreme importance, but it's not just worship that's mentioned in the section. There's worship. There's some writings about how to respond to false prophets, idolatry. There are even some dietary practices that are mentioned. There's tithing, debt forgiveness, the release of slaves, festivals, all these things. Again, a number of statutes and ordinances. These are probably the sections, we're being honest, where we get kind of bogged down, where we get a little bored reading, just because this is something that is very foreign to us. Yet the principle that is laid forth here, Alan, in chapters 12 through 16 is something that we need to take great consideration of. And remember how important it is to carefully consider how we approach God, how we worship God, and to make sure that we were respecting his will in all of those things that we might do. What do you have here highlighted for us on the screen, Alan?
In chapter 12, this is something that's going to pop up so much during the books of Kings and Chronicles. It mentions here that when you get into the land, they are to destroy all the places where the nations worship their gods. And where do they usually worship? They usually worship on the high mountains and the hills. We're more familiar with the term the high places.
Right.
So throughout Chronicles, throughout Kings, when it's talking about a certain king, he served the Lord his God, but he did not remove the high places, or he did remove the high places. That was a mark of his of a good king. But notice what's happening. It says in verse 4, "Don't worship the Lord your God this way." These high places, sometimes they would worship other idols, but more often than not, they were actually worshiping God on these high places.
Right.
But they were obviously doing it in the wrong way. Instead, God says, "Turn to the place where your Lord chooses from all the tribes to put his dwelling, and go there. You are to bring your burnt offerings and sacrifices there. Be careful," verse 13, "to offer the burnt offerings. Be careful not to offer your burnt offerings in all the sacred places you see. You must offer your burnt offerings only in the place the Lord chooses in one of your tribes. And there you must do everything I command." Obviously, this is looking forward to first where the tabernacle rests in a couple different places during the days of the judges. And then eventually when Solomon builds the temple, that would be the final resting place for God. So they were to go to the temple, go to the tabernacle, go to the temple to worship, and not worship anywhere else. And that's why you see such, of course, this is always going to be a problem. Even after the temple is available, they're still worshiping on the high places, even beyond that. And then, of course, when the nation splits, that's one of the main issues that Jeroboam has. He knows that all the people are going to go back down to Jerusalem to worship, and then maybe they'll want to join with the southern kingdom. Well, what does he do? He sets up his own place of worship, the golden calf set at Dan and Bethel. And again, they are golden calves, but they weren't worshiping Baal. They were actually worshiping Yahweh God,
Right.
but doing it in the wrong place and in the wrong way and with the wrong priests and in every way wrong. And the Lord is warning them against that, and for good reason, because that's exactly what's going to happen.
Right. And so many people do not consider the importance of following the prescribed method of worship to God. And so many people, their mindset is, as long as I'm offering it sincerely, as long as I am wanting to praise God or to elevate his name, then whatever I do in the name of worship, that's something that he will accept. And I just have a hard time seeing that, Alan, especially whenever we see here in the Old Testament, as God reveals his nature to us and in the importance that he sees in his mind of following his pattern as he has prescribed. That really stands out to me, how important it was that they needed to, again, carefully do as God had dictated them. But again, in that section, it's not just worship, but it also has to do with false prophets. It also has to do with idolatry, dietary practices, tithing, forgiving of debts, releasing of slaves. In chapter 16, there's a number of festivals that are mentioned: the Passover, the Festival of Weeks, Festival of Shelters. There's just so much here that is of great importance for them, not just to read, but to really think upon, to meditate upon it, and want to do right according to God's will. Those who truly respected God, those who revered him, would see the importance of wanting to make sure that they did things correctly. And no position within Israel was that more important than what they would have coming up in the future, Alan, as you have on the screen, beginning in chapter 17 and verse 14. Then the king themselves, Moses foresees this time when you enter the land the Lord your God is giving you, to take possession of it, to live in it, and say, I will set a king over me like the nations around me. You are to appoint over you the king the Lord your God chooses. Appoint a king from your brothers. You are not to set a foreigner over you, or one who is not of your people. However, he must not acquire many horses for himself, or send the people back to Egypt to acquire many horses, for the Lord has told you, you are never going to go back that way again. He must not acquire many wives for himself, so that his heart won't go astray. He must not acquire very large amounts of silver or gold for himself. When he is seated on his royal throne, he is to write a copy of this instruction for himself on a scroll in the presence of the Levitical priest. It is to remain with him. He is to read it all the days of his life, so that he may learn to fear the Lord his God, to observe all the words of this instruction, and to do these statutes. When his heart will not be exalted, or then his heart will not be exalted above his countrymen, he will not return from his command. He will not turn from this command to the right or the left, and he and his sons will continue reigning many years in Israel. This is the prescribed way that any king in Israel ought to behave, Alan. And it does not surprise me that this comes after these instructions of the need for carefully following God's word. Oh, by the way, this position is of extreme importance in making sure that he follows in these principles as well.
This is such a stark contrast to the way kings typically were during this day and age. I
That's
mean,
right.
what were the three things that most kings did during this time? They had a huge harem. We've already seen, pharaohs and other kings that uh, had multiple wives or multiple women. They try to acquire a vast army and power, so horses, chariots, the like, and of course they're trying to get more and more money. So silver and gold, that's what the kings of the world do. Well, this is they are not to be of the world. They are to be separate. They are a chosen nation. So it makes sense that the king would be completely different. He's not to do those things. And what is he supposed to do? What is he supposed to focus on? He is supposed to focus on his following of the law. It actually doesn't mention, it talks about the king is supposed to make a copy of the instructions as well,
Mhm.
not as an enforcer of the law. I think that would be more on the Levitical priests,
Right.
and not
Right.
even as a teacher of the law necessarily, but because of all the people that need to follow that law as closely as they can. The king obviously would be the most important. As the king goes, so the nation will probably go. So
Right.
so it's important for him to write a copy of this. um, it's real interesting. We actually we see Joshua do this later on. Not even, he's not a king, but he is pretty much the ruler of the people. So he, even though not having that office, he sees the bigger picture concept of having that law copied to his heart. So he does that, and I would dare say that probably David, as much as he wrote down in terms of Psalms and discussing how important the word was to him, I'd be surprised if he never made a copy for himself here. Um, One other thing that's, but after that, I don't know of any other kings that would that fulfilled this. And even David's son Solomon, he famously broke all three of these things. He famously had a ton of money, a ton of wives, and it talks about him acquiring horses from Egypt. So the three things that it says kings aren't supposed to do, Solomon does those. And that's before we see that kind of listed in the books of Kings and Chronicles before it talks about him falling away. So it's a little bit of, if you've read Deuteronomy and then you read that in the book of Kings, and you're like, oh, this is this is not going in the right direction. And actually, the only time I can think of, I love this phrase, he will not turn to the right or to the left. Even David, it doesn't say this about him. The only ruler, the only king that this applies to is actually Josiah. It mentions all the way at the very end, he's one of the very last kings, and really the last good king that Judah will have. And it mentions that he never turns to the right or to the left. So he was about as good of a fulfillment of this king as you can be. And even, of course, he was not perfect. So it begs. This is one of those verses we don't think of as being messianic, but in a way it is, because we see these standards of the king and how important they are, and then we kind of compare that to Jesus. I mean, he's
Right.
Did he fulfill all these things? Like, absolutely. I mean, he pretty much lived in poverty. He never married. He never had a horse that we know of. I mean, much less acquired many horses. And even he fled to Egypt, and then he came out of Egypt. He never went back to Egypt like the children of Israel wanted to numerous times. And of course, just like it says of Josiah, he never turned from this command to the right or to the left. He never sinned. So we really don't see a perfect fulfillment of this divine role, or this kingly role, until we see Christ.
Right, and even later on in 1 Samuel chapter 8, as the people are just begging for a king at that point, Samuel tells them, listen, you think you want a king, and of course the ideal would be for the king to behave in this way. He says, but listen, whenever you have that king finally, you have to know what's going to happen. What's going to happen is he's going to make your life tougher. He's going to have the ability to take whatever he wants from you, almost, and to take from your resources, to take from your family, to take from your servants, to take from your donkeys. He's going to do all this. And then you're going to cry out, but I wish that this hadn't have happened. When that day comes, you will cry out because the king you've chosen for yourselves, but the Lord won't answer you on that day. And that just really goes to the reality that human rulers are flawed, and they're going to make mistakes. They're not going to do things well. But as you mentioned, Jesus, I think that's a great thing for you to bring up, Alan. Jesus does do things well. He does things perfectly, in fact, and he is the perfect king, the perfect ruler for us to follow after. Alan, do you have anything you want to hit on in chapter 18?
Right at the very end, of course, we're talking about Jesus here as kind of a fulfillment of this kingly role.
Oh, yes.
Well, here we have in chapter 18, starting in verse 15, the discussion of a prophet, and this role of a prophet. The Lord will raise up for you a prophet like me from among your brothers. You must listen to him. That's a pretty high standard, because the Lord will raise up a prophet like me. This is Moses talking. So that prophet is at least at the level of Moses.
High level.
We see lots of prophets. We see lots of prophets throughout the rest of the Old Testament.
Mm-hmm.
And it mentions, actually, let's see, I'll kind of jump to the end because it's a great descriptor here. When it's talking about Moses' death here in chapter 34, verse 10, no prophet has arisen again in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. He was unparalleled for all the signs and wonders the Lord sent to him to do in the land of Egypt, and for all the mighty acts of terror. So there was no prophet, at least to the time of this writing, there was no prophet that had arisen like Moses.
Right.
So back here, whom and the main part of that is whom the Lord knew face to face. There was an interaction between Moses and God that is unparalleled amongst anyone in his day and anyone afterward, until this prophecy will be fulfilled.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to wonder, who is like Moses, through the history that's coming up. I mean, maybe the closest is Elijah, but you don't really see the same sort of face to face interaction that you did, just talking back and forth that you did with Moses. So I think this is really pointing to Christ,
Right.
even more specifically. So we see Christ fulfilling this role as the perfect king. Now we're talking about him as a prophet, again from among the brothers. So we knew that this king, this prophet, would be an Israelite, not a foreigner, but from among their brothers. And what does Moses just simply say? Listen to him.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's ironic too that after Deuteronomy, of course, Moses dies on Mount Nebo. The next time Moses is talked about, or the next time we actually see Moses, is on another mountain,
Right.
inside the land of Canaan, on the Mount of Transfiguration.
Mm-hmm.
And he and Elijah are there talking with the prophet that would come. And what does God say after all of that? After we have Peter, I think Peter, James, and John are standing there. This
Don't
is my
listen to him.
beloved son.
Yeah.
Hear him, listen to him.
Don't listen to these
And
guys.
what does Moses say
one.
here?
Mm-hmm.
Listen, here comes a prophet, listen to him. So
that's great.
Definitely, obvious connection there that hopefully didn't fall flat on Peter and James and John at the time. But yeah, a great verse to look
Mm-hmm.
forward to the coming of Christ. Verse 17, I will put my words in his mouth, and he will tell them everything I command him. Jesus, I believe in John, just talks about, I can say nothing except what my Father has given to me. I mean, he doesn't have his own message. He brings the message of his Father. And, verse 19, I will hold accountable whoever does not listen to my words that he speaks in my name. So if you do not listen to the words that Jesus spoke from God, then you will be judged by that. So just a pretty great, some pretty great verses here that look forward to the coming even better prophet than Moses.
That's a great connection between this and the Mount of Transfiguration. That's awesome that you need to listen to this prophet who's coming that's like me. And in fact, what you're speaking of there just shows the superiority of Christ over these other great prophets of God. Peter, James, and John are thinking, well, we have these incredible men. They are revered in Israelite history. And yet here comes God saying, be quiet. Don't worry about these guys, because there's nothing compared to my son. He's the one you need to listen to. That's great. And these verses too, you're bringing up, Alan, 18 and 19, those fit so well into the ministry of Jesus. Now here comes Jesus speaking those words of God, and yet people didn't want to hear. And what God going to do because of that? He's going to hold them accountable. All those accountable who did not hear the words of his son. So here, as I mentioned earlier, that though these are the admonitions of Moses to the people as they prepare to enter into the land, these admonitions still speak very clearly and very, very loudly to us, helping us in the principles that underlie them to be faithful people of God. Thank you. Those great connections there. We're going to cover just a huge chunk here, chapters 19 through 27, which are, again, one of those sections that we might just skim over because we might not think it has much value to us, simply because they are a number of the statutes and ordinances that are going to govern a number of different areas within their lives. We are not, by skipping over them and not diving into them, we are not saying they are of no importance. We believe them to be of God. Therefore, they are important. They're simply just not the focus of this specific study, because we're wanting to continue to build toward getting back into the narrative of the story of the Bible. And as I mentioned, one of the things that's going to help us in that narrative to really lay a foundation for it is to remember, or is to take a little bit of time to recognize what is said from from chapter 28 onward through the rest of the book. We'll do that really quickly right now. Chapter 28, especially, what stood out to me in chapter 28, Alan, is that you have verses 1 through 14, which speaks of the need for obedience, which leads to blessings. You get 14 verses. But then you get verses 15 through the end of the chapter, which is 68 verses of warnings against disobedience, which is going to lead to cursings. I want to highlight just one section here, which is section verses 45 through 52. All these curses will come, pursue, and overtake you until you are destroyed. For what reason? Since you did not obey the Lord your God and keep the commands and statutes he gave you. These curses will be a sign and a wonder against you and your descendants forever, because you did not serve the Lord your God with joy and a cheerful heart, even though you had an abundance of everything. You will serve your enemies. The Lord will send against you in famine, thirst, nakedness, and a lack of everything. He will place an iron yoke on your neck until he has destroyed you. And the Lord will bring a nation from far away, from the ends of the earth, to swoop down on you like an eagle, a nation whose language you won't understand, a ruthless nation showing no respect for the old and not sparing your livestock and your land's produce until you are destroyed. They will leave you no grain, new wine, fresh oil, young of your herds or newborn of your flocks, until they cause you to perish. They will besiege you within all your city gates until your high and fortified cities that you trust in come down throughout your land. They will besiege you within all your city gates throughout the land the Lord your God has given you. Of course, I believe this is foreshadowing and warnings of a future captivity that's going to come that's going to come upon the people of Israel, simply because they were not faithful. We might look at it and say, well, this is kind of a Debbie Downer way to look at it. Why would you only give 14 verses of the good that's going to come from obedience and so many more about the curses that are going to come through disobedience? The reason why is that this was serious, and this was going to be needed. They needed to understand this. They needed to see the seriousness of disobedience. And of course, we know, Alan, looking further into the history of Israel, that they needed these verses because they were stiff-necked and they were uncircumcised of heart, and they were hard-hearted. And in fact, what is said here does come to pass in the future of this people of God.
Yeah, so many of these terrible things. I mean, just looking at that next verse in 53, it talks about how they will eat their own offspring during a siege because they don't have any food left. And I know during the time of the divided kingdom, there's a time when Samaria, the capital of the northern kingdom, is surrounded, and people are having to eat their own children. And there's a short story about how that happens. So this is even just one of these right here. There's a fulfillment of that later on, and there's other examples as well. But that is the result of them not keeping the commands and statutes, and not heeding these warnings at all.
Yeah, verse 58, if you are not careful to obey all the words of this law, which are written in this scroll, by fearing the glorious and awe-inspiring name, the Lord your God, he will bring wondrous plagues on you and your descendants, severe and lasting plagues, and terrible and chronic sicknesses. It all is contingent on whether or not they will be careful to obey what has been given to them. So with these warnings and encouragements towards faithfulness, what Moses does, and he sets up an opportunity now for a renewal of the covenants. And that happens in chapter 29, that these are the words of the covenant the Lord commanded Moses to make with all the Israelites in the land of Moab. In addition to the covenant he made with them in Horeb, he summons all of Israel, and he seeks to reestablish and renew this covenant. And yet what we're going to see is this really up and down nature of what's going to take place. We see that all of you are saying here today, verse 10, All of you are standing today before the Lord your God, your leaders, tribes, elders, officials, and all the men, your dependents, your wives, and all the resident aliens in your camps who cut your wood and draw your water, so that you may enter in the covenant of the Lord your God, which he is making with you today, so that you may enter into his oath, and so that he may establish you today as his people, and he may be your God as he promised you, and as he swore to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We see that a number of times throughout the rest of Deuteronomy, the emphasis on this going back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I'm making this covenant and this oath not only with you, but also with those who are standing here with us today in the presence of the Lord, our God, and with those who are not here today. There is just there is such great importance and such a great emphasis here on making sure that they do what is right for themselves. And you might be thinking, well, what's that going to do? What's it going to do for people in the future if it's just here that they're really emphasizing this covenant? Well, we go back to chapter 6. It isn't just that as they're renewing this covenant, emphasizing this covenant, that's just for this generation, but they are to teach their children. They're to really emphasize to their children the need for this to take place, that not only will this generation do what is right, but the next generation will do what is right because they've been taught to do what is right. And then the next generation will do what is right because they have been taught to do what is right. Yet there's always this possibility, Alan. We see that in the rest of this chapter 29, of people abandoning the covenant. We see in verse 18, be sure that there is no man, woman, clan, or tribe among you today whose heart turns away from the Lord your God and go and worship the gods of the nations. Be sure that there is no root among you bearing poisonous and bitter fruit. And when someone hears the words of this oath, he may consider himself exempt, thinking, I will have peace even though I follow my own sober heart. This will lead to the destruction of the well-watered land as well as the dry land. There's this need for people of every generation to do what is right. And even if they do what is wrong, if they do rebel against God, what chapter 30 says is there's the opportunity for you to return. Why? Well, because of God's incredible patience, his loving kindness, his willingness for his people to always come back to him. And in doing that, there's opportunity for them to just choose life. Verse 11 of chapter 30, this command that I give you today is certainly not too difficult or beyond your reach. It is not in heaven so that you have to ask who will go up to heaven, get it for us, and proclaim it to us that we may follow it. No, it's here, he says. And it is not across the sea that you have to ask who will cross the sea, get it for us, and proclaim it to us that we may follow it. No, it's not across the sea. It's right here with you right now. This message is very near to you, in your mouth and in your heart, so that you may follow it. See, today I have set before you life and prosperity, and on the other side, death and adversity. For I'm commanding you today to love the Lord your God, to walk in his ways, and to keep his commands, statutes, and ordinances, so that you may live and multiply, and the Lord your God may bless you in the land you are entering to possess. But that right there is the life and prosperity that's before them. That's one choice. He says, but, verse 17, if your heart turns away and you do not listen, and you are led astray to bow and worship to other gods and serve them, I tell you today that you will certainly perish and will not prolong your days in the land you are entering to possess across the Jordan. I call heaven and earth as witnesses against you today that I have set before you life and death, blessing and curse. Choose life. Choose life, so that you and your descendants may live. Love the Lord your God, obey him, and remain faithful to him, for he is your life, and he will prolong your days as you live in the land the Lord swore to give to your fathers Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. There is, again, we keep using the words emphasis here. There is great encouragement here. There's great admonition here. But really, in the day, Alan, this is pretty simple. This is a very simple proposition. You're choosing God, which in choosing God, you're choosing life and prosperity, or you can choose anything other than God. And in doing so, you're choosing death and adversity. And you would hope, if you don't know the rest of the story, you would hope that they would see the simplicity of this choice and make the right one.
You see the effort, the work, and the love that God has in this passage. It talks about this command is not too difficult or beyond your reach. It is not something that we have to uh, make an impossible journey to try to get up in heaven or across the sea. It talks about, but where is that command? It is right there before us. It is in our hearts, and it is. All that's left for us to do is to choose. Joshua later talks about choosing this day whom you will serve. That's that's it. We don't have to
Mhm.
go and find. We don't have to work hard to do it. We just have to choose life and prosperity, death and adversity. That command is near us, so that we can follow it. God has done as much as He's willing to do to make it as easy as possible for us to choose life and follow it and prosperity, and yet despite all that, many people will choose the other option. But there's no way we can say that we have, there's too much that we can't do it, we can't obey His commands, it's too hard to get to it, it's too difficult. No, it's uh, God has made it as easy as possible because He desires all to have life and prosperity and to love Him and to walk in His ways. But obviously that we have to take hold of it. We have to choose it. We have to uh, we have to obey Him. And of course, if we don't, then all those curses will come into play.
Right, and this was something that the people had no excuse for not knowing. As you said, it was going to be right there among them. How would that be the case? Well, chapter 31 and verse 9, Moses wrote down this law and gave it to the priests, the sons of Levi, who carry the ark of the Lord's covenant, and to all the elders of Israel. He wrote this down for them. And he's able then, in verse 24, when Moses had finished writing down on the scroll every word of this law, he commanded the Levites who carried the ark of the Lord's covenant, take this book of the law and place it beside the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, so that it may remain there as a witness against you. For I know how rebellious and stiff-necked you are. If you are rebelling against the Lord now, while I am still alive, how much more will you rebel after I am dead? Assemble all your tribal elders and officers before me, so I may speak these words directly to them and call heaven and earth as witnesses against them. For I know that after my death you will become completely corrupt and turn from the path I have commanded you. Disaster will come to you in the future because you will do what is evil in the Lord's sight, angering Him with what your hands have made. And then Moses recited aloud every single word of this song to the entire assembly of Israel. And this is something that I wish we had a lot more time to get into. We're quickly running out of time. But Deuteronomy 32, it really is a court case. It is a court case against Israel that the prophets especially are going to draw back upon, as they themselves are rebuking and condemning Israel in the future for their rebelling against the covenant. As they in the future are actively rebelling against the covenant, the prophets are able to look back to what this prophet said, what Moses has said, and use this, as you might say, the constitution of the law, that they are able to draw upon that future Israel has violated. And if you are not familiar with Deuteronomy 32, I'd really encourage you to take some time to read through it and really think upon it as being just that, being the argument of a lawyer from the perspective of God against the people for the sins that they will commit in the future. Again, this is looking towards the future and rebellion, and the prophets then are able to look back and draw upon it and say, this is what you violated. This is why God is angry with you. This is why He's bringing destruction down upon you. Alan, what do you want to add? I skipped over Joshua taking Moses' place because I assume we'll hit Moses' death here in just a few moments. We can draw back to chapter 31 to highlight who's going to step up now as the next
Yeah,
leader of Israel.
there's definitely no surprise by the time we get to chapter 34 that, I mean, it's mentioned several times, Moses is about to die, Moses is about to die. And of course, there's no doubt who is going to take over. It's going to be Joshua, the
Right.
son of Nun. He's commissioned by God in front of the people, and he's mentioned several different times. So not any sort of division in terms of who the next leader is, which is good for them.
Yeah, he's
And then of
obviously
course,
the very logical leader as well. He's the one who has been with Moses since Exodus 20. He's been right there along his side, seeing how everything has taken place and worked out. He really is just the logical next man up for that position. Maybe not a position that very many people envied, maybe wanted to be in, but he was obviously the right man for the job. Let's see here, Alan. Anything you want to highlight from Exodus 32 or 33 before we do finish out there with Moses' death in 34?
33 is interesting because it really ties Moses in with the patriarchs in a way. This really reminds me of Jacob at the end of his life, Genesis chapter 49, when he gives the blessings to his 12 sons. Well, same thing kind of happens here. The sons are mentioned, starting with, I believe, Reuben, and then Judah, Levi. I mean, all of them have kind of a similar blessing. And obviously these take a little more diving into to really understand every little nuance of what's going on. But it kind of equates Moses with a patriarch in that way, similar on the same plane as Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and being able to bless the people in this way.
And what you're referencing there, Alan, is Genesis 49, and as Jacob is on his deathbed and he gives blessings to the people, and that's a great connection there, and very similar to what Jacob does in that text. Well, that brings us again. This is a summary of all summaries. We've covered just an incredible amount of ground here over this last hour and some change. But it does bring us to end of Deuteronomy, and it brings us to chapter 34, verse 1, that Moses went up from the plains of Moab to Mount Nebo to the top of Pisgah, which faces Jericho, and the Lord showed him all the land, Gilead as far as Dan, all of Naphtali, the land of Ephraim, and Manasseh, all the land of Judah as far as the Mediterranean Sea, the Negev, the plain of the valley of Jericho, the city of palms as far as Zoar. And the Lord then said to him, this is the land I promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I will give it to your descendants. I have let you see it with your own eyes, but you will not cross into it. And of course, the reason for that is something that we've highlighted in previous lessons is Moses himself was flawed. He made mistakes, and it was the mistake of taking all the responsibility upon himself and putting all the focus on himself and Aaron, and taking it off of God as he stood above the rock and struck the rock instead of speaking to the rock, that he himself was not able to enter into the land. And if we question at all how serious God again takes the commands of what he puts forth, how seriously do we need to take them? It's this: even Moses himself was not able to enter into the land. In verse 5, so Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, according to the Lord's words. And Alan, you have on the screen there, that reminds me a lot of back home in East Tennessee. There's a place you can go up, I believe it's on maybe Lookout Mountain, somewhere right around the area, where you can see like 4 different states from one position, and that's what this reminds me of here. A place very similar to that.
Yeah, this is a view from the top of Mount Nebo. If you look at the little marker, you can probably recognize a few of the names. I see Jericho, kind of the bottom right, and the Dead Sea is that you can see the top of the Dead Sea there, kind of on the left. And then I think you can kind of see the Jordan River follow along all the way up to should be able to see them. There's mountains kind of around the Galilee region. So he really was, when it talks about him being able to view the land, I mean, from this vantage point, that's entirely possible on a clear day. Maybe not all the way to the Mediterranean, but at least he'd be able to see a big portion of that land. And it's just, it is kind of, it's a little sad. You almost feel for Moses in this instance, just, getting so close and not being able to get in. But we did already mention the fact that he will eventually show up inside the land of Canaan, many years later, and many books later. But Moses will make it into the promised land, both in that physical way, and of course, when he dies, he's going to make it to that promised land in a spiritual way at that point. But just a great a sad ending, but a noble ending as well. But at the same time, one thing I've thought about is why did Moses die? He seems like as great a figure in all of the scripture. Why was he not the one to be taken up like Enoch or taken up like
Mm,
Elijah?
mm.
And I think, from what I can tell, it would he was held, the Jews held him to such a high esteem that if it was said that he had not died, I mean, they would have considered him
Deified.
deified. Yeah. So I think that's a good reason for him to clearly have died. Now, another good reason why he didn't, another good reason, showing how highly they thought of him is, God did not reveal the burial place. We don't know where he's buried,
Right.
because even that would have been deified, or his body would have been worshipped in some way, or his tomb would have been worshipped. So it makes sense why it's a mystery in that way. We just know the mountain, and we know where that is today, that mountain, but we don't know where his tomb is. And even later on, Jude talks about the conflict between the angel Michael and Satan over the body of Moses, basically. And you understand, Satan knew that would be a stumbling block for them. So, Michael did not, contended with him in that way, that he would not be able to use Moses' body in that way. So, but just interesting thoughts that, why Moses did die. For seemingly, we would think that's a pretty small thing. He struck the rock back then, and that's why. But it kind of makes sense in the bigger picture, and I kind of wonder if that really hurt, not hurt God, but he was upset about that, because Moses talked with him about it constantly, and then God just finally said, "Don't talk to me about it anymore." Almost like, a father and his son, and the son's begging, he's done something wrong. I can't go to the baseball game now because I disobeyed. And, that's the Lord has to keep his word, and, the punishment fits, but it still hurts to, as a father, or as to discipline in that way sometimes. But so I wonder if that's not the case here, but again, just a close of a pretty important chapter in the history of Israel, for sure.
Yeah, I think chapter 4, what you just described, him going up there, I think that is a showing of I don't know if we could say how much it hurt God, but God wanted to give him something. He had already told him, "You're not going to enter in," and he was going to be consistent with that. But here, I want you to at least see that I have done exactly what I've said I'm going to do. Here's the land your people are about to go up in, and your descendants are going to enter into this land. Yet after his death, Joshua, son of Nun, verse 9, was filled with the spirit of wisdom, because Moses had laid his hands on him. So the Israelites obeyed him and did as the Lord had commanded Moses. No prophet has arisen again in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. He was unparalleled for all the signs and wonders the Lord sent him to do against the land of Egypt, to Pharaoh and to all his officials and to all his land, and for the mighty acts of power and terrifying deeds that Moses performed in the sight of Israel. And that concludes then this book of Deuteronomy, this preparation of the people rallying themselves and readying themselves to go into the land. We're going to get in next week into the book of Joshua. And as Joshua takes his turn now, rallying the troops, getting them ready, preparing them to enter into this land of Canaan. We're going to read about the well-known story of Jericho, either in this next study or the study after that. And we'll keep going through with this narrative of the Old Testament, the people of Israel making their conquest towards and into the promised land. Thank you so much for joining us today. I know this has been a rather lengthy study. I apologize for the length to an extent, but at the same time, we had a great amount of text to cover. I hope that we have covered it at least somewhat sufficiently, so you have a better knowledge of what is here within this text. Hopefully we have piqued your interest some, so that you might want to dig into this text a little more. you have any questions about the text, you're reading into it, doesn't make any sense, please feel free to reach out to us here on the Facebook page or on YouTube. You can send a message to the page that this is posted on. We'd love to get back with you and study with you from God's word and help to answer any questions that you might have as best we can. Thank you so much for giving us time this afternoon again on this election day. I hope that you have it has done you good to take your mind off of those things and to focus here upon God's word. And let me just encourage you to really think upon the fact that God has given us great and magnificent promises as well. And even though leaders of men fail in fulfilling their promises in many respects, God never fails. And if you're looking if you're looking for a leader who you could be fully devoted to without reservation, who you can truly trust without having to have any worries about him or her letting you down, let me offer up to you the God of heaven and our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, our King. They have made great promises to people in the past. They make promises to us. They're going to make great promises to people in the future about what will happen if we remain faithful to them. They'll follow through with that. Of that we can be sure. And I hope you'll think upon that today, on this day especially. Alan, thank you so much for your great insight. Again, as always, thank you to those who have joined us today. May God bless you in all that you do. Take care. And we'll see you next time here as we continue our walk through history. God bless each and every one of you.